Welcome to episode 37 of the Hail Married podcast. I'm A. Toves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're back to give our hot takes on the UT game and throw some Hail Mary shots downfield for listeners to love or hate. Let's get started. This was a tale of two halves. The Roadrunners started off strong, scoring on the first two drives. After the Brady touchdown, Traylor threw in some trickeration, going for an onside kick that the Roadrunners recovered and followed up with a double pass for a touchdown to take a 17-7 lead early in the second quarter. Texas battled back to tie the game going into halftime. But the tide would change in the second half, with injuries and penalties taking their toll. Texas outscored UTSA 24-3 and held off the Roadrunners for a victory. What were your thoughts on the game?
I talked about, five-star culture versus five-star athlete. And, we questioned whether UT's culture would be able to be enough to, essentially avoid that letdown against UTSA. I honestly messed up in the podcast because I said, hey, if we get that answer, then there's, this could be bad for UTSA. What I meant to say was, if there's a positive answer to that culture question, it's going to be bad for UTSA. However, I don't think that the players necessarily answered that culture question. I felt like Sark was the one that answered that question by really wheeling out Hudson Card at starting quarterback and shooting him up with painkillers or whatever it took to have him out there handing the ball off and trying to make some quick throws. I think the players were a little bit more resilient. I just don't know if they really answered, hey, our culture now is we're going to lean on this, much like the Roadrunners do when they start getting into some trouble. They lean on some things. But what were you thinking on that? Did they answer that question?
I don't necessarily think that we saw the result on the field based on Texas culture. I think what we saw was Sark saying, look, all of our starters are going to play, and they're going to play for 4 quarters. And if you had that culture really established, the next man up kind of feel to it, I think some of those starters could have been sitting on the bench waiting for, the next game because you're really trying to prepare for the Big 12. But I think Sark was almost sending a message to his players like, we're not going to lose this game. And he was almost willing it to happen because there's no reason that Bijan Robinson and Rashawn Johnson, I keep getting their last names mixed up.
That's all right.
Should have been playing as long as they were, or that Hudson Card should have played that whole game. If you're really that much further along than UTSA. It was almost like he was just kind of sending this message like, I'm not going to lose to Traylor. I'm not going to lose to little brother.
I just felt like UTSA was going to play hard, and I think Sark was concerned about how that was going to affect his players if they didn't try to or come out and match, I guess is the best way to put it, UTSA.
Right. Well, they said at halftime that was the first time that UT had tied or trailed a group of 5 team since 2007. So the fact that they tied UTSA at halftime, that's when Sark was like, look, you're all going to play the second half. We're going to win this game, and we're going to do it, with our starters, with our 1s and 2s. I'm not going to, pull guys in the fourth quarter or into third quarter. I mean, even when the game had changed, he didn't pull, his
right.
starters, and he
You're
didn't
right.
give UTSA an opportunity to come back.
No, you're completely right there. I mean, I think that's exactly what he did. And I had been going back and forth, not always during the game, but before this game with a friend of ours from Austin, Fred, who's actually this UT. He says he's not a UT expert, but he knows plenty of stuff. Anyway, his thing was trailer teams are going to come out and they're going to play hard, which is right. I mean, that's exactly what UTSA was always going to do. It was going to play hard. Whatever happened at the end was going to happen, but that was always that fear, and I think, it was epitomized by your statement of, hey, not since 2007 has a G5 team essentially challenged UT, and that, I think, says enough of itself that Sark was like looking at his players and going, what's wrong with you? So, I mean, you're right. I don't blame him, Sark, for having a little worry, but I think he was confident in the fact that his team is now in a better spot. Now, look, I think if we catch UT last year, when they kept giving up all sorts of yards in the second half. It's clear that they have built something. So this isn't necessarily a slap at UT that we're saying that wasn't answered. It's more of you can tell that there's something building because they were more resilient and they really kept that effort up in the second half.
Mm-hmm. I still don't know that this is a Big 12 champion team, though. I think they're going to be good in the Big 12, but I still don't think they're going to beat Oklahoma for the Big 12 championship.
So what you're saying is Texas is not back.
I don't think they're back. I think they're better. But, are they... I would be very surprised if they won the Big 12 championship. And I still think that they're going to have to take it up another notch if they're really going to be competitive in the SEC next year.
I agree, but I think it's a good building block for them, especially playing a tough UTSA team that, again, just to rehash one more time, that they were definitely concerned about based on what we saw out there. If they weren't as concerned, to your point, they probably would have trotted out Charles Wright as a quarterback and not worried about Hudson Card. It does look, though, that Quinn Ewers has started practicing, so potentially maybe they trotted out Hudson because they figured we're going to get Quinn back anyway for Tech, so no problem. I still think that you don't roll the dice like that because of the fact that, well, I guess from a UTSA perspective, we've seen so many quarterback injuries that, to me, it makes me flinch. So
right.
I felt for UT fans at that point. Now, look, as we left the game, I think there was a couple feelings that were going through me. It was disappointment and concern. 50% of the disappointment for me came from the fact that it really felt like we, and I say we, it's more like UTSA left plays on the field. Whether it was they made errors, like the Corey Mayfield 4th and 4, offsides, or if it was, the Zachary Franklin drop, or, any of these key moments when UTSA had an opportunity to make, essentially either force a punt or, get a stop on UT or even, continue their drives, and penalties or something else got in the way, just lack of execution. Did you feel the same way, or did you get a sense of something different?
I mean, we knew going into this game that we were really going to have to execute at the absolute highest level. In a different level of competition, you can overcome those, but you just, we just didn't have that kind of ability to overcome those types of mistakes against UTS or UT.
No, it's well put, and I think as we look forward then, and I say the other 50% of my disappointment and then the 100% of concern came because of the injuries. Mm-hmm. You talked right now about the margin of error in order to win the game. And that started shrinking as you started seeing guys just go down in injuries. Because now, all of a sudden, it's no longer, we've got, and I'm just going to throw out a name, but we've got Luke Lepese. No, now he's gone down. Now we're really starting to scramble. And look, I get that, Traylor and his coaching staff get all of these guys prepared. And they've got the, I think Josh Cephas talked about, having, hey, we've got that next man up, philosophy or whatever. It's easier said than done. I mean, that's a big stage. You got 100.
The reality
102,000. So
yeah, and the reality is when you get to further down in the depth chart for a school like UTSA, the talent gap becomes even wider between UT. I mean, starter to starter, you have a significant talent gap. And again, that's not a knock against any of our players. That's just, the reality. Texas players are bigger, faster, stronger. So it just becomes an uphill battle. And again, I think our guys played very well. They never quit. They gave the effort. They represented the brand well. But again, when you have those kinds of injuries, it's frustrating because it's one thing to want to win this game, but at the end of the day, we all know the eye on the prize is Conference USA championship, and we need them healthy because we can compete. I think if you look at our talent on our roster, we have a much higher talent than some of these other teams in Conference USA. So, it's frustrating to see these guys get injured and know that, they may not be there during conference play when we need them.
And I think the part you left off there was, we really want to win this game, but at what cost, right?
Yeah.
At what cost? And I mean, let's talk injuries real quick. Traylor talked about 21 players hurt.
That's just...
I mean, come on.
I know. That's really, really frustrating. I mean, the thing that we had talked about in the first, in the season preview was we had to stay healthy. And, unfortunately, that hasn't happened.
And, I'm laughing at just how ridiculous it sounds because it really is. Like, we're just falling apart. And, I know Traylor and the coaching staff can do all sorts of things with scheme, but at some point, like, it just takes a toll on what they can do. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the offensive review of this game. But, I mean, 7 injured offensive linemen. Like, I just...
Yeah.
That position group since Traylor's been here, I mean, he said it, but it just sounds unbelievable to say that that's just such a huge knock on your 2 deep for the offensive linemen. Mm-hmm. I mean, especially at the tackle position, it's really taken, I think, a toll there. And now we see the outside linebackers are have gotten hurt. You got the Taylor brothers that got hurt. Pay Cage got hurt. Now it looks like Danye and Pay Cage may be back, but again, I think we go back to the question that I said, hey, you left this part off, which was, sure, we want to win the Texas Southern game, but at what cost? Like, what cost do we need to send Danye and Pay Cage out there? At what cost, for some of these other, offensive linemen, do we need to get those guys out there? It's certainly, I think tough to discuss. Also being tough to discuss is the fact that this is the second game in a row that we've had 10 penalties. Now, 10 penalties, and it's been 40 yards this time, or I think it's 40 or 45 yards. However, 10 penalties still are momentum killers because you had stuff like a illegal shift that negated a touchdown bomb to Josh Cephas. That drive ended up in a field goal because of another penalty about the goal line. So, right here, those things are starting to stack up. But then you get that roughing passer call in the second half, mm-hmm. which ended up being targeting on for Frank. But you end up with another stall drive. And then not getting in a touchdown in the red zone in the third quarter, followed by that interception, it just... I mean, again, we've already kind of talked a little bit to death, but these things just stack up. And that's where the disappointment came from me. It's just not that I was disappointing the players, but just really disappointed for them because they put their hearts out there. You could tell they were trying as hard as they could, but that line margin of error was just kind of shrinking so much before our eyes. And, at that point, I really just wanted them to get out of there without any more injuries.
Right.
When Frank took that, essentially that knock to the head, I was more concerned with if he really has a concussion, these next couple weeks might be tough. And I'm sure he would have been okay, but...
Yeah, which is why I think at that point Traylor was like, I'm not going to risk it. Let's just pull him out of the game and put Eddie Lee in there.
Okay, one thing real quick that I wanted to note, which we saw it on the rewatch, but, Frank takes that knock on the head, and then one of the coaches, once they reversed it and, they gave the ball back to UTSA and kind of walked off that penalty, one of the coaches smacks Frank in the head in the helmet and was like, he's like, you all right? And it's like, why are you doing that? Are we making the situation worse? This is not what we need to be doing. But anything else before we move on?
No, I think that's okay.
All right, let's start with the special teams review. Heck of a Jared Sackett onside kick. And then Jamori Robinson just with a great recovery. I mean, look, we caught him off guard, but you know what?
Caught everybody off guard. All the fans, too.
But, yes, it was guts making that call to have it then, but then it's got to be executed. And when I saw that execution, it felt like maybe things are kind of going right for UTSA. Right. There are a lot of positives here. And, certainly, great again for Jamori. That was, I think, a good moment in his young career. Sackett, back to making his field goals. Looks like he, like you said, maybe it's the yips at West Point.
Maybe he just stayed up too long, didn't get enough sleep, from that flight. But, he seemed very confident in this game, and, it was great because that's what we needed.
Got a question for you, though. Lucas Dean had some decent punts, but they haven't looked to his standard. Think it's maybe something to watch?
I mean, maybe. It might just be the fact that we didn't punt that much last year. He's a little out of practice.
Which is a good thing, right? We're not trying to make it seem like it's necessarily a bad thing, but certainly when you are punting at the level that he has been, it is at times tough to watch. when you see something and it's not really going his way. So
I mean, he might also need to keep an eye on Brady because we all know that, he can punt now. So, like...
the Swiss Army knife that is Brady.
He's got somebody, over his shoulder.
Maybe that's what it is. He saw that punt against Houston. He's all right, I see you, Brenden. Maybe he's going to take some snaps at running back. I don't know. Just throw it out there, right? All right, let's go to the offensive review. We're going to start with my preview review. Talked about the offense needing to be patient and efficient. I felt like they did that, and they took some calculated risks. But again, penalties just hurt them. And I think that's part of the efficiency that just really hurt them. But I felt like they were making some chunks, taking some shots here or there. But I also felt like there was a couple scrambles from Frank where normally, and I think I told you it was like, when we were doing the rewatch, was if he's going towards the first down marker, normally he gets like 2 or 3 yards ahead of the first down marker. It felt like because of the UT speed, it was only about a yard past. I mean, they were really chasing him down, and they were making it tough for Frank to really show his athleticism.
Yeah.
The next thing was, hey, let Frank cook. Like I kept talking about that. I was pounding the desk the last time. I felt like, I think it's relative the way people are seeing, Frank play. Some feel like, it's not what he was like last year, but he was getting much more consistent offensive line play last season. This season, he's really having to make plays, and I feel like that internal clock is just set at the right time. And you can tell because there are fans that are like, especially the UT fans are like, why can't we get to him? Because he just seems to know what time to release the ball, whether it's quick, whether it's, after a couple of seconds. I think, has finally mastered the fact that the game clock and the game is really slowed down for him. And you can tell just in the way he's, slicing and dicing everyone. And that's why I kept saying, let Frank cook. Like, let him just fling it around. And they did. And I think that it was successful to a point. I mean, obviously I think he's got some passes that he's going to look back and just wish he could have back overall. But, I mean, am I missing anything in this?
I mean, I think the thing is the game plan now is going to be to get the ball out as quick as possible because Frank doesn't have the time to be in the pocket, because the pocket will collapse just given the fact that, we're having struggles with the offensive line. So you're not necessarily going to see him stand back there and throw a really deep pass because it takes time to develop. And that's nothing against Frank or the receivers. It's just about, we got to get gains. We've got to, get yards, make first downs. So you may not see as many of those 30, 40-yard passes as you will see, 5, 10 chunk passes trying to, again, just move the chains and keep going.
And to me, that's been the thing that I've been kind of harping on before is that let Frank do that because I think that really sets up the deeper passes later in the game or, at certain times. And I think he becomes more efficient with those. But more importantly, you're now getting that ball out quickly to your playmakers and letting essentially Josh, JT, Zakari,
even Oscar. Yeah.
He had a nifty little move after he caught a pass against UT where like fake left and then just let the defender there in his dust. So there's just getting it out to the playmakers. I think it's important, but it's also again going back to what you just said. I mean the offensive line issues, they have to scheme differently, and I think we're all seeing this on a week-to-week basis that Will Stein and Matt Maddox are trying to figure out how to maneuver this offense and how to get them to essentially continue being efficient, knowing that Frank needs some protection and needs something.
But as much as we've talked about the offensive line injuries, and we've talked about how they aren't able to be as efficient, at the end of the day, Frank didn't get sacked as many times as he could have. Part of that's Frank, part of that's the scheme. So the fact that we really didn't see as many sacks, again, I think it's just a testament to how hard these kids are working, how the coaches are scheming differently to try to, just account for these weaknesses right now. And I think they're doing a pretty good job of it.
And then let me add this. I'm glad you brought it up because there was no holding penalties.
Right.
Clean that up from the first 2 weeks that we've seen holding penalties like really hurt this offense at times because holding penalties is essentially 10 yards. So that can really derail the offensive drives, right? None here. I mean, there were other penalties, but 5 yards is much more manageable than 10.
Right.
And, I think these, again, I'm with you. I really want to applaud the OL for cleaning up those things. I mean, obviously there's some other issues, but regardless, really good on them. I will say, though, that I really missed Traylon Smith being in this game. I know Traylor had talked about the fact that, he probably could have played, but they wanted to be safer, which is perfect. Like, again, going back to what I think the mantra you had put up there, yeah, you want to win, but at what cost, right? So let's not have Traylon hurt even more against really a physical UT team.
Right. Yeah, I mean, let's save him for Middle Tennessee or, further down the line, even if we need to. The one thing that we did see in the rewatch that I wanted to bring up was when Eddie Lee was in there, he had a really nice block. I forgot which one of the running backs had the ball, but you pointed it out, man. Like, Eddie Lee just, knocked a UT receiver on the ground.
It was actually, I think it was one of the linemen, and that's what, it stood out to me because I was like, did he just take on a lineman? Like, I can see taking on maybe a linebacker, but, a 290, 300-pound lineman, like, ooh, Eddie. But then, as we rewatched it, I was joking around with Atos, and I was like, kind of felt like that Terrell Owens kind of crying meme from, with Tony Romo. That's my quarterback. That's my QB. But at that cost, what would have happened if,
he would have gotten hurt.
And he really would have gotten hurt. I would have felt terrible. But, no, I mean, go back and look at it if you can. It's, definitely, I think, in the fourth quarter. It's late in the game.
Probably the third to last drive or something. Yeah, it was
a few yards that got reversed back to the right hand side, but yeah, totally worth it. Loved it from Eddie Lee. Let's talk player of the game. Honorable mention. I'm going to give one this week. I said Frankie Martinez. They called him the Mr. Walk-On of the world. Look, Frankie's really been battling. He's clearly overmatched out there. But you see him continually getting out there. And I'm not trying to be philosophical here, but we've all gone through things where we're way in over our heads. We think there's no way we're going to accomplish whatever we're going to accomplish. And Frankie has done a very good job of just battling throughout these games and, just keeping his head above water. And I think he's done exactly what has been asked for. I mean, again, go back to no sacks this week, no holding penalties. He has helped clean up some of the issues that he had, in the first couple games. So it really is. I know it really doesn't mean anything that we're giving out this honorable mention, but I just really wanted to highlight him and just really give a chance to anybody that listens.
I'm sure it was the highlight of his week,
right? But anybody that listens to this podcast, at least Frankie's doing his thing, and we've all been there, right? But the player of the game for me is the Swiss Army knife that we have, which is Brady. Atos, what can he do? He rushed and passed for a touchdown.
I know. I mean, I feel like we just need to see him on defense at this point. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I was like, are we going to have to line him up at the tackle position? I don't know. I mean, I think he could potentially do it.
I think he could play cornerback, and he'd probably get an interception.
I'm sure against Texas Southern, we'll probably see him out there, either punting the ball to himself or, maybe even onsiding it. It's look. Just fantastic. I think Brendan Brady, I kind of held my breath when he went down, and it was really more of a leg cramp, but he had some really tough runs, and again, kudos to him. Obviously, essentially took off the spring, some of the summer, and to see him kind of just getting back in shape, really getting things going, and finally seeing his career having some really good moments in his career. I guess I should say is the best. Is just has to bring a smile to your face.
Absolutely. Glad to see that he is staying healthy, too.
Yeah. So let's jump on over to the defensive review, the preview review, right? Can UTOL hold up against a sturdy UTSA defensive line? Yes, they could. Though I didn't feel like UT was really trying to set up any sort of long passes for Card or anything where they had to essentially be in the pass blocking for very long. And a lot of it had to do with Card's health because of the fact that he had that bum ankle. You've pointed out before, they kept him in the entire game. There was no need to do that. They could have brought in Charles Wright late in the game, but they didn't.
I mean, they did run a few wildcat plays, but
we knew that they were going to do that, right? And that just made it even more difficult, which brings me to this. I talked about tackle. that was probably the worst aspect of the defense, but I don't know that it was necessarily UTSA's just a bad performance on there. That strength and speed of Bijan Robinson and Roshan Johnson, you can tell why Bijan's an NFL prospect.
Right.
It was clear on the field that he was the best player out there. There's a lot of things that Frank could do, but man, like the power that Bijan had, that speed, he had UTSA defenders just falling off of him, not necessarily bouncing off of him.
Right.
But, it wasn't like they were in bad position. It was just, Bijan's just a little bit faster. Roshan's a little bit faster. I mean, I hate to put it this way, but they were fun to watch. It just hurt that it was against, the team that you cheer for, right? But clearly these guys just are just something else. Just, something obviously we wish that we had here at UTSA, but man, I just think that they really made our defense at times look a little, I hate to say silly, but just make our defense look much more average than it really is. And, that's nothing against our defenders. It's just, these guys are just something special.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where UT really started to turn the tide in the game, too, is that they started rushing more in the second half, and they just really started to wear down the defense.
Greg Luca had an interesting stat. It was like, after the first quarter, UT had 27 rushing yards. At halftime was 91. At the end of the game, it's 298. Now, a lot of that was that big Bijan run in the second half, but even then, I mean, they were just hammering away. And I think you have a stat here on the rushing yards for UT. They had 32 plays where the rushing yards were 3 yards or less. And so, while you had that big Bijan run, it really seems like they really ripped off a lot, but it felt like a lot of like the sort of UTSA offense of last year, where you had Sincere kind of just getting 3 to 5 yards per rushing play, right? And it's just kind of hammering away, and then by the end of the game, you're just so tired, and they were so beat up on defense that you're trying to give arm tackles, but at this point, if you were having problems just wrapping him up and bringing Bijan or Roshan down, it was going to be much more impossible by the end of the game. So with that, let's talk about the defensive player of the game. I'm giving it to Brenden Matterson. Thought he played a hell of a game in the trenches. He was disrupting that UT rushing game. The problem is he only played like about, I think, per PFF about 27, 28 snaps. So, as much as, you wish you had him out there this week, I don't think he's on the depth chart. I think he's one of those 21 players and hopefully not one that we're looking at being out for long term. Yeah, so, I wish we would have been able to see him longer, but I think he was outstanding at his time that he was out there. I also want to kind of give out just a quick shout out to, Nick Fortune. Fortune continues to be, I think, just this standout, essentially cornerback for us. It's clear, obviously, he played for West Virginia, so he played against UT before. But the thing is that it's clear the difference that he makes. He is really great in coverage, and he's really such a great compliment to Corey Mayfield. And Mayfield is no slouch either. I thought he's played really well in coverage too, and played well in this game as well. It's just that when you're playing guys this level, they can make your outstanding look kind of average at times. And neither one of them, I think, had really bad games. But I think the most important thing is you don't hear much about either one of them because they also aren't getting penalized. Big things from them. So let's go on to the coaching review. Something new that we've added. Yeah, I mean, the last couple of games we've talked about some questions we've had in terms of game management, timeout usage, that sort of thing. But really didn't see any of that. I mean, nothing stood out in terms of questioning why we were doing something in a bad way. I mean, of course, hey, we were questioning why we did the onside kick, but it worked out, so that was great. Maybe held our breath a little bit when we realized we were doing the double pass again, but, as long as those work, I guess, as Trailer would say, if they work, you're not going to question them, right? If they don't work, we would probably be sitting here saying, why did we onside a kick that early? Yeah, I mean, but I also think that, they're really cleaning up a lot of issues that we've seen in the first two games. Now, new issues have popped up, but I think, again, you're going to feel like they're manageable because of the fact that they were able to essentially get over whatever the yips they had in the first two games. And so, this time management stuff, I think, has really solved itself.
Right.
I think, from what we've seen at this point, right? Other thing we noticed was Coach Traylor seemed at least much more even-tempered after this game. I think, again, looking back and what we've been talking about, and don't want to rehash it too much here, but I think the fact that the injuries were taking a toll, he waved the white flag, pretty, I would say, I think it was like 10, 11 minutes left in the game. So, even I think he realized we can keep pushing, but we're not going to be able to overcome UT, and at what cost is this going to be if I continue down this road?
Yeah, absolutely. I was glad to see that he didn't seem to be dwelling so much on issues, mistakes. Like, he seems to be in a good place. Like, we played hard. We, showed what the brand is. All right, let's move on. And that's really what we wanted to see out of him after the Houston game. So I'm glad that, he's kind of gotten out of that mindset for this game.
Last thing on the coaching, though. Special teams coordinator Justin Burke seems to have cleaned up all those sub-issues, those kind of issues that they had, on the punt teams and, even the kickoff. But let me just ponder this. Like, he did it in a week where players were dropping with injuries. So did they fix the root cause, which was communication, or did they truly, I guess, address the issue? I mean, I don't know. I mean, let me ask you that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it remains to be seen, but clearly you would have expected that there could have been some issues in this game because of the noise, because of just the fact that we were playing, at UT, and this is a big game, and the guys are so excited about it, but it really did seem like everybody was very dialed in and focused, so, hopefully everything's been resolved.
All right, normally we talk about what we learned from the game, but let me ask you this, now that we're a quarter of the season done, what have we learned from the first three games?
Well, if we go back to our season predictions, the first thing we said was these three games were going to be really tough, and we needed to get out of them with no injuries, or minimal injuries. That didn't happen.
No.
And it just seemed to really pile up in this last game. We've already talked about more, continuous concerns on the O-line. Now we have concerns at outside linebacker. Sounds like from Traylor's interview today that there's going to be a couple of kids that are going to be out for the season, unfortunately. So didn't quite achieve our goal. Hopefully, we will make it through the rest of the season without any significant injuries, and maybe we'll get some of these kids back. But, definitely not as bad as we could have feared, but certainly not what we wanted for the season.
Well, we thought potentially, because of the Army curse, we thought potentially, Frank Harris might be one of those guys. And knock on wood, but he has been healthy. And I think that would have been sort of a season derailleur.
Right.
But obviously it's tough to just see some of these guys go down, and some of them obviously for the season. So just good vibes to them from us, and I'm sure from every UTSA fan. Hopefully we get to see them back on the field, enjoying playing out there, with Traylor.
When we looked at these first three games, I said, if we go 0-3, it's okay. If we go 1-2, it's good. If we go 2-1 or 3-0, we should build a statue of Traylor.
Yeah.
So we got good. 1-2. Thought we were going to steal that Houston game, but Army was the win. Still, I'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, look, you knew that the team was going to play hard, and they were going to give themselves a chance to win. I mean, even though we had thought potentially it could bottom out, essentially, so to speak, at 0-3, you knew that they were going to give all three of these teams everything they could handle. So they did, and they were able to come away with the win at Army. So I think huge that they're coming out of this 1-2.
You talked again in the season preview about how few drop passes the wide receivers had over the course of the entire year. I think you might have jinxed them.
Of course.
We've seen some uncharacteristic drops in the first couple of games that hopefully we don't repeat as we go into conference play.
I think the problem with Zachary is that he's always been just a body catcher. Like, he lets that ball come into his body and he catches it like that. In that fourth down play, he took his eyes off the ball. He started looking up ahead instead of trying to like catch the ball, secure the ball, and then dropping forward for the first down. And, he's done that before already in the Houston game, and, Traylor had to get after him. So, I think he has lost his head at times, and I don't know that it's necessarily dropped because the hands have gotten worse. I think it's just concentration hasn't been as locked in as, it's been like he was last season.
At the beginning of the season, we thought we were going to see less 12 personnel this season simply because, Traylor had kind of talked about Oscar and how good Oscar was and how they were, still kind of trying to feel out the lineup after that, and that they didn't necessarily have, someone, he didn't say it this way, but he didn't really have that number 2 that was going to replace Leroy Watson. However, given the O-line issues, we've seen a lot of 12 personnel this season.
Yeah, and not in the way that we saw with Leroy Watson. It's been more split out. So you have seen like Gavin Sharp and Dan Dishman in there, and both have played well. And I think that's just a testament to, the coaching staff, really getting these guys up to playing, and then when they get out on the field, they're performing. Good or bad, it doesn't matter. I think Frank, either way, is dealing, and that's the bigger part of this, is that, as long as they are consistent in catching the ball, then I think they're just adding to really, what's going to give us a lot of looks on offense.
Yeah, and kind of going along with that, you've said that we're on pace this season, based on these first 3 games, to have the most total yards per game at 453.7 yards per game. I mean, given all of the O-line issues that we've talked about kind of ad nauseum, who would have thought that we'd still be able to achieve that?
And against the first 3 opponents. Like, we thought that was going to be tough games, and we knew that they're going to play hard, but did we really think that they were going to put up this many yards?
Yeah.
I mean, some of it is because of, obviously overtimes and stuff, but it's not like they have to drive the whole field. It's only like 25 yards. So you really were talking about the fact that this offense has really chewed up some yards. And, I wouldn't have thought it in that way. Would you?
No, I mean, certainly. I think, again, given all of the issues, we've still been able to play hard, and we've been able to draw up schemes that have been effective.
That's a good point. One more thing. Let's talk about the defensive transfers. I kind of gushed about Nick Troy Fortune, but Joe Evans has, really shown out. We've had a couple other players who, have really played well. We've got Pig Caves that's kind of been battling to get in there, has gotten some time.
Nick Booker Brown,
last week. Again, we felt like the defensive line was just reloading, and they did. And it's just, this week, you're out, essentially, I think, Joe Evans and Brandon Matterson. And yet, you look at the line, you're like, that's weird. Like, it doesn't feel like there's going to be that much of a drop-off. And it's, again, not knocking Joe or Brandon.
No.
It's just, that's how talented we have these defensive linemen at, or the talent level these defensive linemen are at, and the depth.
Yeah, and enough depth that Traylor said he's going to move 2 guys from the D-line to help the O-line. Now, we don't know who those guys are. Likely they're people we haven't seen on the field this season. But, again, he's obviously feeling, even with the injuries, that he still has enough depth there that he can move some personnel around to help out an area where he doesn't have that depth.
And how awesome. I mean, I know that there might be struggles if we get the defensive linemen in there, but how awesome if they can perform really well. I'm sure they will, because, Traylor's not going to put them out there if he doesn't feel like they're prepared enough.
Mm-hmm.
But just how awesome it is, for these guys to be able to just really, again, lean on the culture and say, be the next man up if I have to, and I'm going to go out there and protect Frank. Okay, last thing. And it really just kind of came to me as I've been watching these last 2 weeks of non-UTSA football. I now understand why we had such a Houston hangover, because this UH team is a poop show. They had 2 wide receivers fighting on the sideline. You want to talk about culture issues? Dano, what the hell is going on over there in UH? And again, I think seeing it now from potentially the UTSA players' perspective, they're like, how did we lose to these guys? 2 guys that especially guys that are fighting.
Yeah.
There's infighting going on over there. They lost a game to Tech in overtime, which they gave up 4th and 20. 4th and 20. Like to a Tech team that I don't think is really as good as they're coming off to be. And then, okay, they lost to a really good Kansas team. We already talked about, or we will talk about, Rock Chalk Jayhawk. We did talk about it last week. Now they're gone to 3-0 again this week. I kind of talked about it before, but and mentioned it as they were potentially on the fraud list this year. Were they right?
Maybe.
It's baffling. Obviously I know that they had some issues with wide receivers, but just weird to see them all of a sudden. It seems like they're beginning to bottom out. And I don't know that. I question whether they're going to be really competitive in AAC at this point. Let's move on to the Texas Southern preview. Look, it was difficult enough just trying to find some info on them and trying to find video. I found very little. This is an FCS school that I just don't see that UTSA is going to take them for granted.
Yeah, we've sort of had some culture pillar violations in the podcast so far, just looking forward to a conference play. But again, I think Trailer is going to be focused on Texas Southern this week and, not looking ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it just feels like how casual UT fans were with UTSA last week, where they were just kind of taking it for granted. Oh, you guys have a football team, you guys might not be very good, blah, blah. I think obviously the team showed that they were pretty good. So, look, there's just been plenty of respect from Trailer towards the Texas Southern coaching staff. He discussed, that there was, I think the head coach had helped him, at certain points, with players. And yeah, we don't want to look ahead, but this is a team that, as we go through some of these positions, they're just going to be a little overmatched. That said, they lost 59-27 to North Texas, but that game was a little closer during that first half than I think we care to admit, or at least if you're a UNT fan, you care to admit. So let's talk about the offense. First, you got to start out with quarterback Andrew Body. Look, he struggled in his first 2 games, but then it seems like he kind of turned it around against Southern. He's completing 61.76 of his passes, but he's only thrown for 479 yards. This isn't a very lucrative offense or one that's very prolific. So it just feels like they're going to struggle against a UTSA defense. That said, they've got running backs Ladarius Owens and Ja'Cory Howard. Neither one popped too much in terms of statistics. Owens 31 for 160 yards for 3 touchdowns. He's got 2 catches for -1 yards. Howard is 27 for 114, 2 touchdowns. One thing about Howard that I will say is that he doesn't lose too many yards on rushes. He kind of, based on just stats and the very limited stuff I could find, he kind of reminds me a little bit of Sincere. Sincere rarely lost yards when he was rushing. Mm-hmm. A little bit of that in Ja'Cory. Their big play receiver is Derek Morton. He's had the most catches, 13 for 223 yards and 1 touchdown. This offensive line has size, but they just don't seem very imposing. It's very reminiscent of a early UTSA offensive line. So let's go over the defense. Look, the defensive line has some athleticism. I think they run maybe a 4-2-5, but they definitely have a 4-man front. They're just mostly undersized. It's an FCS team, so certainly not one that's I think built for playing some of these better G5 teams, and not even being able to hang with some of the P5 teams. You've got DeMontario Anderson as their top tackler. He's their defensive end. I found that kind of interesting because I'm not sure if he's defensive end and he's standing up, or if he's actually has his paws in the ground. But he's their top tackler with 23 tackles on the year, with linebacker Jacob Williams. He's second with tackles at 17. These guys are the ones that you're probably going to hear trying to bring down some of the UTSA rushers. Obviously some of the wide receivers if they get some sort of little screens. That said, their top performer is their cornerback Isaiah Hamilton. He's got 2 interceptions on the year. He's just going to have his hands full against the UTSA wide receivers, whoever he goes up against. I mean, and that's the problem. It's going up against UTSA's wide receivers. You get the big 3, and you're like, oh, which one which one can I cover? Oh no, there's essentially almost a replica at this other position, this side of the field, replica on the opposite side of the field. So whoever he's got, it's really, I don't think it'll matter too much because the other cornerbacks aren't as good as Isaiah. So with that, I think the keys to victory: offense, just execute the way they have. I would say that they take the approach that Houston and UT have done with UTSA, where they kind of just batter them with some runs, let Frank do some play action off that, and just continue just kind of pelt them with some of these short, quick passes. And I think that you might see some bigger gains from our wide receivers. That said, on defense, I think the defensive line just needs to bully that offensive line. If they do that, it's going to make it so much harder for Texas Southern to even mount any type of offensive threat.
So last time when we played Lamar, we saw Frank in the game, I think, through the third quarter. Do you think...
Halftime.
Was it halftime?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, do you think that's kind of how this game is going to go again? Or do you think we'll start to see more guys get rested this game just because they've been so battered against, the last three opponents? Do you think we're going to see more of our 2s and 3s out there playing longer?
If they execute the way they have, this could start getting out of hand by halftime. But I hesitate saying that because this Texas Southern team, I think, depending on the crowd size, obviously, who knows? I don't think they've played in front of the types of crowds that UTSA has played. Mm-hmm. So does that moment get too big for them? I don't know that it necessarily does, but certainly I think there's a scenario where they get overwhelmed by the crowd size, mm-hmm. and before you know it, that's affecting them as well. I honestly think that Frank plays the first half, and if you're up by just a few touchdowns, then they bring in Eddie Lee and just let him kind of close out the third, maybe going into the fourth.
You think we see a Cam Peters?
I think we definitely, if things go as I think the keys to victory would kind of
suggest.
Yeah, I think we should see Cam, and I think we should get to see him at least take a few drives here because he really, he's never taken a college snap, so right. He really needs that experience, even if it's against Texas Southern. So, let's hope that that's the case because that means that this game's in hand, and that our starters get a chance to stay sharp enough by playing a little bit, but not so much that it gets out of hand, or that they have to play like the entire game. So give me UTSA 55-13 over Texas Southern. Hopefully, again, we see these starters get some lighter work over the weekend.
Before we go, let's talk about some highlights and lowlights from
Sure.
Conference USA. Big news out of Conference USA this week was Rice beat Louisiana 33-21. Louisiana only managed 175 yards of offense and 9 first downs. They really got lucky in that Rice's quarterback, McMahon, threw 3 interceptions, and converted quarterback wide receiver Luke McCaffrey was actually Rice's leading receiver with 105 yards and 10 receptions. Interesting to see Louisiana kind of having it so rough this year after losing their coach.
Is Rice back?
For the second.
Were they even there? I don't know.
I don't know that you can say Rice is back when you've thrown 3 interceptions to pretty much give Louisiana the points that they scored, I think. But good for Rice. They're on a high this week, apparently.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the opposite side of the spectrum, UTEP lost to New Mexico and now dropped to 1-3 on the season.
So, we've been hearing this from a lot of people saying, or a lot of analysts saying, UTEP, they're on the road up. It's, they've got their stuff together. No, you don't. And the reason that I've given every single time is Gavin Hardison. And lo and behold, he is the reason why you're not. He's completing 48% of his passes, which, like the Mendoza line, is pretty much 65% at this point in college because, it's such usually a quick pass, easy throws. 48%? Are you kidding me? And I know he lost Jacob Cowing, But come on, like even if Cowing had graduated, it's really no excuse for having 48%, in terms of completion percentage. But look, I've watched him throw, and there's just been times where he's just scattered armed. And the fact that Dana Dimmel really essentially went all in on Gavin Hardison. Unfortunately, the problem is that Traylor went all in on Frank Harris, and look where he's at now. Dana Dimmel put everything in on Gavin Hardison, and Hardison really hasn't improved. And it's hard to improve accuracy if you've never really been accurate. He's got a much more of a cannon than Frank does, but at what cost? I mean, if you can't complete passes, then
right, if you're not
cool
accurate.
That you can throw it 50 yards down the field, and Frank may not be able to throw it as far. But you're also now 1-3. So I think it's going to be hard for them to get back into potentially getting to a bowl, which I think just puts UTEP back, moves them back just a step.
So they were the flash in the pan.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
In Big 12 news, for the second week in a row, a shout out to our nephew's alma mater, Rock Chalk Jayhawk, for beating Houston at home in the rain to go 3-0 for the first time since 2009.
Lance Leopold, I still can't say his name right, but hell of a coach, man. Like he's really done a great job. Everywhere he goes, he starts turning programs around. He gets them just to play smart, and again, look what's going on. And now he's, his name has been floated around for Nebraska. I think if Nebraska wants to get the shine back on their helmets and actually be respectful again, this would not be the worst hire in the world. I think Leopold, while he's about 58 years old, still worth a shot.
So, the question is, can Kansas make a bowl this year?
I think they can. I am impressed by what they've done. I think that they've got, the game of the week, really. It's undefeated Kansas versus undefeated Duke.
Mm-hmm.
Both 3-0 teams. Mike Elko at Duke is doing a fantastic job after leaving his defensive coordinator position at A&M. This is going to be a fun game. I think just two teams that play smart and play hard. And, I still think Kansas goes to a bowl. I think they probably pull a couple more upsets in Big 12 as well.
All right, we'll see. And last but not least, UTSA students got an email this week from Lisa Campos asking them to come to the game. Apparently, the attendance for the students at the Houston game was just over 7,000 and the sixth largest student crowd. I'm actually kind of surprised that 7,000 was only our sixth largest student crowd.
It was bizarre. And so the reason we know about the email is because of me. I'm taking a grad class there at UTSA. So I looked at my UTSA email and I was like, oh, look at this. Now, it said this past week, so I don't assume that they could have figured out how to get the ticket count for UT, or obviously there's 7,000 did not go to West Point. So it has to reference Houston. And that's, again, bizarre. I know that people were spilling into I think they were trying to get him up into the third deck there at the Dome. But yeah, that is really bizarre.
Seems like a very high number. But hey, if we passed 7,000 and we've had more than that, that's amazing.
I mean, the crowds just keep getting bigger. Honestly, the students are really bought into it, everything the trailer does. I mean, maybe it's just a free pizza, but whatever works, keep hacking it.
Well, that wraps it up for us. Thanks for joining again. I'm Toves.
And I'm the Toves.
We'll be back next week to recap with hopefully a big win against Texas Southern.
Birds up.